Prince of Wales has raised the question in a recent interview about change in the monarchy. And this, to my mind, is a fascinating subject. And it's worth thinking about what our monarchy is and how it operates, because it isn't exactly what you might think. We assume that the monarchy passes seamlessly from father to son, father to eldest son. But actually, this doesn't happen as often as you might think. If we take the history of the English kings prior to the conquest, this certainly wasn't the case. As you all know, my great hero Alfred was not the eldest son, he was the youngest son, and he had nephews who were living. But in those times, you needed an adult and you needed somebody who was capable of ruling, which he was. You come to the last of the Anglo-Saxon kings, you come to Harold. Harold takes the crown by force. He is elected by the Witan, the forerunner of the Privy Council, but the Witan only votes for him because he forces them to. He was the strong man of his time. He did not have a really good claim to the crown. William the Conqueror. Let's begin with the Conqueror and work through from then, because we assume that's where the kingship of England and later Britain really starts. Well, it's in his name, isn't it? He didn't have the best blood claim by any means. He's the conqueror. He conquers, wins England, rules England. But who is he succeeded by? He's succeeded by William Rufus, William II. Now, William Rufus was not his eldest son. There is an elder brother called Robert, and Robert gets lands in Normandy whilst William snatches England. He just gets here faster and ensures that his coronation takes place quickly so that he can be king. He then dies mysteriously. And this is worth remembering, that our kings don't all die peacefully in their beds. Quite a few of them go before their time. William gets an arrow through him in the New Forest. Many people think he was murdered. He wasn't popular. He was having great rows with the church. He had fallen out with St. Anselm, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, and in many ways a precursor to St. Thomas Becket. So he dies, and who succeeds him? Not Robert again. Robert loses a second time as Henry I sweeps in. He gets the treasury at Winchester, and he has his coronation extremely quickly. Not by Anselm, incidentally, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was still in exile. Anselm then comes back later. So of the first three, since the conquest, one obviously the conqueror, two younger sons, the eldest son cut out both times. Henry then has a son who dies on the White Ship, leaving the monarchy or the heirship vacant. And so he gets all the barons to accept his daughter Matilda. Now Matilda, daughter again of a Matilda, is interesting because she brings back a link to the Anglo-Saxons. Henry I, in his marriage, had married a descendant of Alfred to try and legitimize the new Norman line in the line of the old Anglo-Saxons. So Matilda has Alfred's blood in her and Norman blood in her. All the barons and Stephen agree that she will be the queen. It's a very bold step. There are some precedents for it. They're not particularly good. And of course, when Henry I dies, it doesn't happen. Stephen takes the crown. He is a cousin of Matilda. He isn't the first in line in any direct sense. And yet he gets not only his own supporters, but he gets the country broadly to accept his kingship. And he rules until his death. And fortunately, by that time, he has no direct heirs. So a deal had been done so that Matilda's son, Henry II, is able to inherit. So far, at no point have we had father succeeded by eldest son. Henry II was succeeded by his eldest son, Richard the Lionheart. But Richard the Lionheart spends most of his time outside of England fighting crusades. He dies and ought to be succeeded by his nephew Arthur. But he's not. His nephew Arthur was murdered by King John, bad King John, and bad King John takes the throne by force. So we've now gone from 1066 to 1199. We have had 7 monarchs, and only once has it gone from the king to his eldest son, that is Henry II to Richard the Lionheart. We do now get a run of eldest son to eldest son. We get Henry III, has a difficult and long reign, but nonetheless passes it on to his son Edward I. Edward I, a very great and important king, who passes it to his son Edward II. Edward II is a disaster. Edward II is deposed. The country is run by his wife and by Mortimer until Edward III stages a coup against those who are running him as a regent and takes control himself. He takes control after his father has been murdered, has Mortimer executed, and puts his mother essentially in a gilded cage, keeps her safe out of the way whilst he gets on with ruling, and is himself a really excellent king, at least until old age. Unfortunately, his eldest son, the brilliant Black Prince, one of the most famous and romantic figures in our history, predeceases him. So it doesn't go to the Black Prince, it goes to the Black Prince's son, Richard II, who is a child king. Pity the land whose king is a child, as it says in the Bible, and Richard II is a pitiable figure in the end. He has his virtues, he's deeply religious. The Wilton Diptych was made for him. He deals with the peasant revolt remarkably while still a child, but his rule is bad. He is difficult to deal with. He is faithless. He is cruel, and he was deposed by Henry IV. Henry IV doesn't have the best claim to it, is straightforwardly a usurper. Indeed, you could say his whole reign is marred by his feeling that he's not entitled to the kingdom, and he almost certainly, on his orders, has Richard II murdered. So Richard II is out of the picture, dead, buried, and done away with because he wasn't a good king. And this is important, that if you think, who have we got so far? Rufus, Edward II, Richard II, interestingly, all of them seconds. Whether there's some link in this or it's just coincidence, I think it's just coincidence. All of them actually murdered because they weren't good kings. Kingship, partly hereditary, but partly you've got to do a good job. If you don't do a good job, you are in trouble and you get replaced. Henry IV, succeeded by the wonderful Henry V, one of our greatest kings, Victor at Agincourt. But Henry V dies young, succeeded by Henry VI, who was a 1-year-old in 1422 when he came to the throne. 1422, remember this year, it is the last time the Kingdom of England, or indeed of Scotland, the United Kingdom as it's now become, passed father, eldest son to eldest son for a second generation, 3 generations in all. Isn't that interesting that you'd think our normal form of kingship that goes from the father to the eldest son, to the eldest son, to the eldest son, hasn't actually happened since 1422. And poor old Henry VI, saintly man, founded Eton and founded King's College, Cambridge, deeply religious, but not up to the job of being king. Henry VI was deposed not just once, but twice. The Wars of the Roses by Edward IV. When he's brought back very much as a puppet king, and eventually he's murdered in the Tower of London on the orders of Henry IV. So this is our 4th king who is done away with in a system that we believe to be hereditary. We then get Edward IV. Edward IV, another usurper, and they all claim that everyone else is usurpers and that they have the best right, but Edward IV, clearly usurped the crown. It's interesting, we seem to find that the fourths are usurpers and the seconds get murdered, but I don't think one should read too much into the numbers. Edward IV, usurper, tough-minded king, ruling reasonably well, but dies young. Dies young, leaving 2 young children as the heir and the heir presumptive. They are Edward V and his brother Prince Richard, the famous princes in the Tower. He also had daughters who become important in a moment. What happens to them? Well, they get murdered, and they get murdered by their uncle. So we're back to King John, who murdered Arthur. We now have Richard III, who has Edward V murdered, and his younger brother Richard murdered to clear the way for his rule. Richard III rules and then dies at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. So I'm beginning to lose count of quite how many kings have been usurped and murdered. But the number is getting larger and larger. This is not the system that we think it is of neat heredity. And we haven't yet got to the Tudors. We've just got to the very beginning of the Tudors. Henry VII, followed by Henry VIII, as most people other than David Lammy know, who seem to get the order slightly muddled, but let's not dwell on that too much. Henry VIII, of course, not the eldest son. Once again, Henry VIII was the second son. Arthur was the eldest son who died. And Henry VIII succeeded not again by his eldest son. He had sons who died by Catherine of Aragon, one made Prince of Wales. But nonetheless, it's succeeded by his son. But then, of course, it goes to the two sisters, possibly, depending on how you look at this, via Lady Jane Grey. So even in the 16th century, that powerful Tudor dynasty, the monarchy doesn't go the way that you think it should. And there is competition. Why is Lady Jane Grey important? It shows that people aren't neatly accepting what is going on, indeed has been legislated for. They want their own views. The powerful want their own choice of king. And this has been happening now for some time. I mentioned that Harold was elected by the Witan, but Richard II was deposed by Parliament, the first occasion on which Parliament decides who will be king. And actually they meet in Westminster Hall. The House of Commons meets in Westminster Hall, which has just had its wonderful hammer beam roof put on it by the instruction of Richard II. And the first meeting that takes place there is to depose him. So by this time, by the mid-16th century, you've got a well-established precedent that Parliament legislates for who should be the king. And they did legislate. They legislated in the reign of Henry VIII that no foreigner should be king. Until, of course, 1603, when Elizabeth I dies. And yes, at that point, foreigners very much included the Scots. And James I and VI became King of England, uniting the crown specifically against the law. So we're again seeing this is not neat hereditary, it's hereditary with legislation and brute power, because we all know what happens to the son of James I. I've got a little bust of him sitting here. As you can see, it's in his finery with his little garter medallion on, and very distinguished and distinctive looking figure. I've also got, which I thought you might like to see too, one of my favourite possessions, which I might put a photograph up of to make it clearer, which is a miniature of Charles I braided in his own hair. I have actually also a handkerchief that was dipped in his blood. So lots of mementos of Charles I, because he is an important king. But what again does he show us? He shows us that if you don't succeed as king, you don't remain king. Just go through to Charles I, because he's the last one. What happens to the kings who were killed? And who were they? They were William Rufus is the first one to be got rid of. Then you have Edward II and Richard II. Then you have Henry VI. Then you have Edward IV. Then you have Richard III killed in battle. Lady Jane Grey, if you wish, we'll put that in brackets, and then Charles. So we've got to 7 or 8, depending on how you want to count, in a few hundred years. It's quite a high-risk job. It is not neat heredity. Charles I, well, there's an interregnum, there's the period of Cromwellian dictatorship, and then you get back to his eldest son, Charles II, who died without a legitimate heir. You get James II. What happened to James II? He's chucked out. And who is he succeeded by? Well, yes, partly his daughter, but also another William the Conqueror, effectively William of Orange, William III, who doesn't have a very good claim to the kingdom. but is made king by Parliament and is made king for his lifetime should he outlive Mary, which is exactly what he did. He outlived Mary and is not succeeded by Anne until he dies after his horse had stumbled over a mole. And the Jacobites used to toast the gentleman in velvet, the gentleman in velvet being the mole whose molehill had caused William of Orange's horse to stumble and had led to his death. Now, when Anne dies, the succession is up in the air because they're very worried about having a Catholic king again. They don't want the country to go back to Catholicism, and they're worried, of course, more than Catholicism, they're more worried about absolutism. So they go for the child, the son of the Electress Sophia. There are dozens of better claimants to the throne in a straight hereditary line, dozens, than George I. George I is chosen by Parliament to be king. The Act of Settlement decides by law. This is not the first time Parliament has decided, but since then, the parliamentary rule of who is king has been absolute. And who have we had from then? Once again, we don't get the eldest son succeeding eldest son. This remains extremely rare. George II was the eldest son, but his son, Frederick, Prince of Wales, dies, possibly playing cricket. Anyway, he dies. He was a difficult fellow to his father. The relationships, father and son, of the Hanoverians were never that easy, succeeded by George III. And George III, very long reign, 60 years of reign, but he doesn't rule the whole time because he goes mad. George III has a regency at the end of his reign. And I've got here another bit of royal memorabilia, which again I might show closer pictures of, which have a couple of letters from George III to his daughter Amelia, and they are absolutely touching because the first one's written in 1788 when he was sane, and the latter one is written when he has completely lost his mind and is a terrible, terrible scrawl. I will put photographs up so that you can see, but it's very poignant about how George III declined, but he was unable to reign for the last few years of his period. It was done instead by the Prince Regent, by George IV. George IV succeeds. It's going to be succeeded by his daughter Charlotte. She dies in childbirth. Is instead succeeded by his brother, William IV, who again is not succeeded by an eldest son. He didn't have any legitimate children. He is succeeded by Victoria. Victoria was succeeded by her eldest son, who was not succeeded by his eldest son. George V was not the eldest son. He had an elder brother who died. And what happened to George V's eldest son? He abdicated. Even as late as 1936, the monarchy has not passed in this neat line of succession that you would expect. The Duke of Windsor, as he became, unlike his predecessors who were deposed, lived out his natural life. That tells you more about the 20th century than I think it does about monarchy. He was succeeded by our beloved late Queen, his brother George VI, but then by our beloved late Queen, then by King Charles, whom God preserve. But what is fascinating about this, I hope I've explained, is that the monarchy does not pass in the neat way you expect. There is choice in it, the choice recently of Parliament, but previously of barons and powerful figures, and to some extent archbishops of Canterbury. The coronation was always a really important point. There was a strong sacramental feel to it, and people were less likely to rebel against an anointed king than they were to rebel against one who hadn't been anointed, where they felt it was free reign. And bear in mind, Edward IV, for example, one of the princes in the Tower, wasn't crowned. His coronation was scheduled, it was then postponed, and Richard was crowned instead. So there was a feeling it was easier to get rid of him if he hadn't been crowned. But it's been a choice. And why is this important? Well, the importance is that kings actually have to get it right. It isn't a free ride. It isn't even a job for life for those who don't get it right. The King and the late Queen and George VI, and indeed George V, got it magnificently right and have made it look incredibly easy. Just continuing and seeming to glide through. But it isn't actually like that. George V was worried when the Tsar fell and all the other royal houses fell after and during the First World War, that even his house could be at risk. They have to be sensitive to public opinion. They have to understand what public opinion is. They have to relate to the people that they reign over, even now when they don't rule. And therefore, the Prince of Wales, when he says he wants change, is saying something that must be true. The monarchy needs to evolve. It always has. If it is to maintain, it needs to evolve. But it is also a risk, because the monarchy has never been quite as powerful as it seems when you look back and know that that's what was there. For those of us who are devoted to the memory of our late Queen, remember how the monarchy wobbled on the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. It needs a monarch who understands how to adapt and how to reign effectively. The predecessors of our current king didn't always learn that lesson. And when they didn't remain king. And this is something I think we forget because we look back and assume an inevitability of history. Thank you for watching.